I was about to explain sympathy as a concept, but then my cat jumped into my arms and suddenly the question became much less abstract. How do we respond when another living being reaches out to us? Welcome to another episode of Learning by Explaining. Today I'm trying to think through Max Scheler's Nature and Forms of Sympathy, or Wesen und Formen der Sympathie, in a slow and simple way. This is not a book about abstract logic alone. This is a book about how we relate to other people emotionally, how we feel with them, how we understand them, and how emotional life has its own inner structure. What strikes me first is that Scheler does not seem to treat emotional life as something chaotic or secondary. Already in the preface, he places this book inside a larger project of the laws of emotional life. That is very interesting because it suggests that feelings are not just random reactions. They have structure, they have forms, they have interrelations. So the question is not only, do we have feelings? The deeper question is, how is emotional life organized? What kinds of emotional acts are there? What is the difference between them? And this is where sympathy becomes important. Usually, in everyday language, we use sympathy very loosely. We might mean pity, or empathy, or kindness, or compassion, or emotional closeness. But Scheler does not want to leave it vague. He wants distinctions. And I think this is one of the most valuable things in the whole project. He slows down emotional life and asks us not to confuse different experiences just because they all feel warm or human. One thing I noticed in the beginning of the main text is that Scheler says he does not begin with love and hate. Instead, he begins with those processes in which the experiences of others seem to become immediately understandable to us. Things like compassion, suffering with, and rejoicing with. That is already revealing. He begins where human life becomes relational, not with isolated inner emotion, but with a question, how do I participate in the joy or suffering of another person? And that seems to be the real entry into the problem. Because sympathy is not just a feeling inside of me. It's a relation to another being. It already points beyond the isolated self, and at the same time, it raises a difficult question. If I say, I feel with another person, what exactly is happening? Am I really experiencing something of the other? Am I only reacting in myself? Am I perhaps projecting myself into them? So from the very beginning, sympathy is both familiar and mysterious. The first chapter begins with what he calls so-called ethics of sympathy. And that is important because it means he is not just describing sympathy. He is also questioning a moral tradition that gives sympathy a foundational role. From the opening page, Scheler seems to be saying something like this. Many thinkers believed that love, compassion, or shared feelings could serve as the basis of moral life. In other words, morality begins when we are affected by others. At first, this sounds convincing. A person without sympathy seems cold. A person untouched by suffering seems morally deficient. So why would Scheler be so critical? I think his concern is this. If sympathy becomes the ultimate basis of ethics, then the value of the other person might become dependent on my emotional response. Then morality begins with my feeling. But the other person is not valuable because I happen to feel moved. Their worth does not begin in my emotional reaction. So Scheler seems to resist reducing ethics to the emotional state of the observer. That is a very subtle point. He is not saying sympathy is bad. He is saying sympathy alone may not be enough to ground morality. And honestly, I think that is a strong insight. Because sometimes we confuse being emotionally affected with being morally clear. But those are not always the same. This is where the book becomes really interesting. In the table of contents, Scheler distinguishes several phenomena: Miteinanderfühlen, Mitgefühl, Gefühlsansteckung, Einsfühlung. Even if I am only working here from the visible structure of the text, the point is already clear. Scheler does not want one blurry concept. He wants to separate different emotional relations, and that matters a lot. Because in ordinary language, we often treat all emotional closeness as if it were the same. But Scheler seems to insist it is not all the same. Let me try to think through these distinctions in a simple way. But first, there is something like feeling together. That suggests a shared emotional situation. Perhaps a common joy, a shared grief, a collective mood. Second, there is Mitgefühl, fellow feeling or compassion. That sounds more directly like a feeling with another person in relation to what they are undergoing. Third, there is Gefühlsansteckung, emotional contagion. This already sounds very different. A feeling spreads, it moves through people. But spreading is not the same as understanding. And that is such an important distinction. If I enter a room full of tension and become tense, that does not automatically mean I understand the people in the room. If a crowd panics and I panic too, I have been affected, but not necessarily in a morally meaningful way. The feeling may simply be contagious. Fourth, there is Einsfühlung. This suggests Scheler is distinguishing sympathy from another mode of relation in which one somehow feels into another. And that itself is philosophically important. It means Scheler wants precision. He does not want us to treat every access to another person as identical. I think this is one of the clearest lessons from the book. Human emotional life has types, not just intensity. Not every strong feeling is the same kind of feeling. If I had to highlight one especially modern insight, it would be this. Scheler's distinction between sympathy and emotional contagion feels incredibly relevant. Because today we are surrounded by contagious feelings. Online outrage spreads, panic spreads, excitement spreads, sadness spreads, even moral language spreads. And because it spreads so quickly, we often assume it must be deep. But Scheler's structure suggests a warning. A feeling can be shared without being understood. A reaction can be intense without being ethically meaningful. That matters because it protects us from certain kind of illusions. The illusion is this. If I feel strongly, I must already understand. But that is not necessarily true. Sometimes I am merely drawn into a mood. Sometimes I am overwhelmed by atmosphere. Sometimes I'm reacting to myself. So, a genuine philosophy of sympathy needs distinctions, otherwise it becomes sentimental. And I think Scheler is trying to save emotional life from vagueness by describing its forms carefully. The next major part of the book is love and hate. That already tells us something important. Sympathy is not the whole emotional life. It belongs within a broader field. Love and hate seem to be deeper and more fundamental orientations. The table of contents shows that Scheler treats the phenomenology of love and hate, the values and kinds of love, the relations between love and the person, and also the boundaries of naturalistic theories of love. So, if I try to think with Scheler here, I would say he probably does not want love to be reduced to mere pity. Love is not just feeling sorry for someone. Love is not simply emotional participation in suffering. Love seems to have a broader and more positive role. It has something to do with a person as a person. And hate, on the other side, would not just be a passing bad mood, but a way of opposing, distorting, or closing oneself off. So this broadens the whole discussion. Sympathy is important, but it's not the deepest category. It belongs inside a larger emotional and ethical world. The final major part listed in the content is vom fremden Ich, the foreign self, or the other self. And I think this is where the whole book opens onto a deeper philosophical problem. Because sympathy is never just about feeling in isolation. It is about how another person is given to me at all. How do I encounter another person as another center of life? How does the other, I, appear? The table of contents points here are the meaning and order of the problem, the you and the I, and the perception of the other. That tells me, for Scheler, sympathy is inseparable from intersubjectivity. In simpler words, to ask how I feel with another person is already to ask how another person becomes present to me as someone with their own inner life. And that makes the whole project deeper than a theory of kindness. It becomes a theory of human coexistence. Not just how do I react emotionally, but how is the other person there for me at all? And that is a beautiful shift because it means sympathy is not just a moral decoration. It belongs to the very structure of personal life. So, if I have to step back and ask myself what I am actually learning from explaining this, I would say, first, Scheler teaches me that emotional life is structured. Feelings are not just private inner weather. Second, he teaches me not to use sympathy carelessly. There are different forms of emotional relation, and confusing them leads to philosophical and moral confusion. Third, he makes me suspicious of emotional immediacy. Just because I feel affected does not mean I understand. Just because a feeling spreads does not mean that it reveals truth. Fourth, he places sympathy inside a larger field that includes love, hate, and the problem of the other person. So the book seems to move from a specific emotional phenomenon toward a deeper account of personhood of human relational life. And I think that is why this text still feels alive. Because it asks a very modern question in a very careful way. When I say I feel with someone, what do I actually mean? Am I sharing, understanding, projecting, being infected by mood? Turning toward a person, or merely reacting inside myself? That question is not small at all. It goes into the center of ethics, friendship, love, and social life. If I had to put Scheler's challenge into one sentence, maybe it would be this. Do not call every emotional closeness sympathy. Ask what kind of relation it really is. And maybe that is what makes this book so powerful. It does not make emotional life smaller. It makes it more precise. And that precision is not cold. It is a way of taking human feelings seriously. Meinst du, er stirbt in meiner Hand?
Nein, er stellt sich nur tot, wenn du anfasst.
Er ist so
Was Sinn
süß.
ergibt.
Oh, der ist schön.
Ja.
Rosenkäfer, oder?
Ja.
Die war eigentlich am Samstag.
Ein ziemlich kaputter Rosenkäfer, weil der schon weiße Streaks
War
auf
wirklich sehr, sehr
dem
spannend.
Häufig so.
Die Kirche war relativ voll.
Ja,
drin. Wir saßen oben am
Ja, ich meine, jeder, der sich auf seinen
aber auch
Pflanzen
der
findet, wird sie weghauen.
Kohle oben drauf. Das heißt, ich habe genau
Außerdem
Luisas
sind sie halt
Kopf
wahnsinnig
gesehen,
tolles
und
Futter für
sonst
jeden
nicht.
einzelnen.
Oh nein,
Ich habe
nicht,
einen
nicht.
Musiker gesehen. Ich habe nur diesen einen Kopf überm Holzbrett gesehen.
Was soll ich mit euch nehmen, bitte?
Ja, bitte.
Alles wichtig.
Aber mit Liebe.
Es ist
Echt?
Ah, oui.
Ja, oui, oui.
Das man früher Frösche in Milch getan hat.
Und dann?
Dann hat die Milch länger gehalten.
Oh Gott, ich hab gedacht, ihr springt.
Der hat sich keinen Millimeter bewegt. Nicht mal einen halben.
Ich schwör dir, er hat mich angesprungen. Nein.
Ja, also.
Milch? Und dann hat die Milch länger gehalten, ernsthaft.
Weil Frösche irgendwelche Dinger in ihren. Also die geben halt irgendeinen Sabber ab.
Jetzt.